The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama, co-authored with psychiatrist Howard Cutler, is a guide to cultivating lasting happiness through a combination of Buddhist philosophy and modern psychology. The book explores the nature of human suffering, the root causes of unhappiness, and the practical ways individuals can shift their mindset toward greater joy and peace. It emphasizes that happiness is not a fleeting emotion, but a skill that can be developed through compassion, mindfulness, gratitude, and inner discipline. Through dialogues between the Dalai Lama and Cutler, as well as real-life examples, the book presents a practical framework for overcoming anxiety, anger, and insecurity while fostering resilience, kindness, and emotional balance. His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, is the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism and one of the world's most respected figures of peace and compassion. Born in 1935 in a small village in Tibet, he was recognized at a young age as the reincarnation of the 13th Dalai Lama. After the Chinese occupation of Tibet in 1959, he went into exile in India, where he continues to live and lead the Tibetan community. Awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989, he is celebrated globally for his advocacy of nonviolence, human rights, and interfaith harmony. Beyond his role as a religious leader, the Dalai Lama has written numerous books that bridge spirituality with science, ethics, and personal development, making timeless Buddhist wisdom accessible to people across cultures. The central message of The Art of Happiness is that the ultimate purpose of life is to seek happiness. The Dalai Lama explains that this desire for happiness is universal and transcends culture, religion, and background. Everyone wants to avoid suffering and live a life filled with joy. Yet many people misunderstand what true happiness is and chase it in ways that often bring only temporary satisfaction or even more suffering. To him, happiness is not found in material wealth or fleeting pleasures, but in cultivating inner peace, compassion, and a balanced state of mind. The book begins with a series of conversations between the Dalai Lama and Dr. Howard Cutler, an American psychiatrist who serves as both collaborator and narrator. Through their dialogue, the Dalai Lama presents Buddhist wisdom in practical, relatable terms, while Dr. Cutler raises questions from a Western psychological perspective. This format allows the book to bridge two worlds, the spiritual insights of Tibetan Buddhism and the scientific framework of modern psychology. The result is a blend of philosophy and practice that readers can apply to everyday challenges. The Dalai Lama emphasizes that happiness is a state of mind rather than an external condition. While circumstances can influence our emotions, the deeper sense of happiness is cultivated internally by shaping how we think and respond to life. This idea aligns with the Buddhist teaching that our perception of the world is largely shaped by our mental attitudes. Two people may encounter the same event, but their interpretation and reaction determine whether they experience suffering or peace. Thus, training the mind to adopt healthier perspectives is key to achieving lasting happiness. He also addresses the common misconception that happiness is selfish or self-indulgent. In reality, genuine happiness is deeply connected to compassion and caring for others. When we develop compassion, we not only ease the suffering of others, but also create conditions for our own well-being. By shifting the focus away from the ego and toward empathy, we loosen the grip of anxiety, jealousy, and anger, which are major sources of unhappiness. The Dalai Lama suggests that cultivating compassion is not merely a moral duty, but also a practical strategy for happiness. Another theme in the book is the inevitability of suffering. The Dalai Lama acknowledges that pain and hardship are part of the human condition. No one can escape sickness, aging, loss, and disappointment. However, he argues that while suffering is unavoidable, the degree of our suffering can be managed by how we interpret and relate to it. If we view suffering as an opportunity for growth, resilience, and empathy, it loses some of its power to destabilize us. In this way, suffering can even become a path toward deeper happiness, as it helps us appreciate joy more fully and strengthens our connection to others. The Dalai Lama and Dr. Cutler also explore the role of desire. In Buddhism, unchecked craving is seen as a root cause of suffering. Yet the Dalai Lama clarifies that not all desires are harmful. There are realistic and unrealistic desires, as well as healthy and unhealthy ones. Wanting food, shelter, and companionship are natural and beneficial, but craving excessive wealth, status, or perfection often leads to frustration. Learning to distinguish between constructive desires and destructive ones is an essential step toward happiness. By moderating our expectations and cultivating contentment with what we already have, we reduce the constant sense of dissatisfaction that drives so much unhappiness. The book further explains that happiness is cultivated through mental training. Much like physical fitness requires consistent exercise. By practicing mindfulness, meditation, and self-reflection, individuals can gradually reshape their mental habits and emotional responses. Just as negative emotions like anger and fear can become ingrained patterns, positive emotions like compassion, gratitude, and patience can be reinforced until they become natural tendencies. Over time, these practices rewire the mind toward greater resilience and joy. A striking part of the Dalai Lama's perspective is his emphasis on kindness. He argues that kindness and affection are fundamental to human survival and that they form the basis for long-term happiness. From infancy, humans rely on the warmth and care of others to thrive, and throughout life, our sense of connection and belonging continues to be vital for our well-being. Modern life often fosters isolation and competition, but returning to the simple principle of kindness restores harmony both within ourselves and in our relationships. Dr. Cutler, coming from a psychiatric background, often brings up issues such as depression, anxiety, and loneliness. The Dalai Lama does not dismiss these challenges, but integrates them into his broader teaching. He acknowledges that mental health conditions can make the pursuit of happiness more difficult, but he stresses that even in difficult circumstances, cultivating compassion, perspective, and gratitude can improve one's outlook. His message is not that happiness is easy or instantaneous, but that it is achievable through consistent effort and mental discipline. By the end of the first part of the book, the Dalai Lama has established a foundation. Happiness is the purpose of life. It comes from within, and it can be cultivated through mental training, compassion, and the right attitude toward suffering and desire. He invites readers to view happiness not as a passive outcome, but as an active pursuit, one that requires awareness, effort, and commitment, but ultimately brings the deepest form of fulfillment. After laying the foundation that happiness is the ultimate goal of life and must be cultivated from within, the Dalai Lama turns to the obstacles that prevent people from reaching it. He and Dr. Cutler explore how negative emotions, anger, fear, jealousy, hatred, and resentment are among the biggest barriers to happiness. These emotions are often automatic and deeply ingrained, but the Dalai Lama insists they are not permanent traits. They can be weakened and replaced with healthier mental states through awareness and training. Anger receives particular attention because it is one of the most destructive emotions. The Dalai Lama explains that anger arises when our desires or expectations are frustrated, or when we feel threatened or attacked. It creates a distorted view of reality, magnifying the faults of others and blinding us to their good qualities. In moments of anger, we say and do things that cause harm, not only to others but to ourselves. Scientific studies cited by Dr. Cutler confirm that chronic anger has damaging effects on health, contributing to stress, high blood pressure, and even heart disease. The Dalai Lama's advice is not to suppress anger, but to understand its causes and cultivate patience and tolerance as antidotes. When we recognize that others act out of ignorance, fear, or their own suffering, it becomes easier to respond with compassion rather than hostility. Fear and anxiety are also explored as sources of suffering. Many people live with constant worry about the future, financial security, relationships, or health. The Dalai Lama acknowledges these fears but points out that most of them are exaggerated or imagined, arising from our tendency to focus on worst-case scenarios. He suggests countering fear with realistic analysis, asking ourselves what the actual likelihood of disaster is and what practical steps can be taken. If something can be changed, action should be taken. If it cannot be changed, then worrying serves no purpose and only drains peace of mind. This perspective reflects the Buddhist principle of focusing on what is within our control and letting go of what is not. Another obstacle is self-centeredness. The Dalai Lama explains that when we are too focused on our own problems, we magnify them and feel overwhelmed. By shifting our focus outward toward the welfare of others, we gain perspective. Compassion for others not only reduces our own suffering, but also creates stronger social bonds, which are a key source of joy. Helping others brings a sense of meaning that self-absorption never provides. Dr. Cutler notes that in Western psychology, this aligns with findings that altruistic behavior is linked to greater well-being and lower rates of depression. The Dalai Lama also stresses the importance of perspective in shaping our experience of life. The same situation can be perceived as a tragedy or as a challenge depending on the lens we use. For example, losing a job might be devastating if seen purely as a failure, but it can also be reframed as an opportunity to pursue new directions. This doesn't mean denying pain or pretending that hardships are easy, but rather recognizing that our interpretation plays a major role in how much we suffer. Developing the ability to adopt broader, more flexible perspectives helps us remain resilient. Closely tied to perspective is the cultivation of gratitude. The Dalai Lama suggests that people often focus on what they lack rather than what they have. This tendency breeds dissatisfaction and envy, which erode happiness. By deliberately appreciating the blessings in our lives, such as health, relationships, opportunities, or even small daily pleasures, we shift our mindset toward contentment. Gratitude fosters a sense of abundance rather than scarcity, countering the endless cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. The conversations also turn to intimacy and human connection. The Dalai Lama highlights that despite cultural differences, human beings everywhere have a deep need for love and belonging. However, he makes a distinction between two types of love. One is based on attachment and expectation, loving others because they fulfill our needs or desires. This type of love is fragile, easily shaken when circumstances change. The other type is based on genuine compassion and concern for others' well-being, independent of what they give us in return. This unconditional love is more stable and forms the basis of lasting happiness. Dr. Cutler brings up the issue of romantic relationships, which are often a source of both great joy and great suffering in modern life. The Dalai Lama acknowledges the intensity of romantic love, but suggests that relationships built only on passion are unstable. Over time, passion fades, and unless it is replaced by deeper qualities, trust, compassion, mutual respect, the relationship can deteriorate. He advises cultivating qualities that sustain long-term connection rather than chasing fleeting emotional highs. In this sense, the principles of compassion and perspective apply equally to personal relationships as to broader social interactions. Another significant theme in this part of the book is the importance of work and meaning. Many people tie their happiness to their careers, yet dissatisfaction is widespread. The Dalai Lama proposes that the key is not in achieving prestige or wealth, but in finding purpose. Work that aligns with our values, that benefits others, or that allows us to grow is more likely to bring satisfaction. Even in jobs that seem mundane, adopting an attitude of service and viewing our contributions as valuable can shift the experience from frustration to fulfillment. The Dalai Lama also addresses how modern culture often promotes the pursuit of material wealth as the path to happiness. While acknowledging that material comforts are important for survival and security, he warns against over-reliance on them. Wealth can reduce certain forms of suffering, such as hunger or lack of shelter, but beyond a certain point, it does little to increase happiness. In fact, it often creates more stress, competition, and isolation. True happiness, he argues, must come from cultivating inner qualities, rather than endlessly seeking external rewards. This section of the book reinforces the idea that happiness is not a passive state, delivered by circumstances, but an active process shaped by our attitudes, choices, and mental habits. Negative emotions, unchecked desires, and narrow perspectives are obstacles, but they can be transformed through compassion, gratitude, patience, and the pursuit of meaning. The Dalai Lama continually reminds readers that the path to happiness requires practice, much like learning any skill. By consistently working to reshape our thoughts and emotions, we gradually build a more stable and lasting sense of well-being. With the foundations of happiness and the obstacles to it discussed, the Dalai Lama and Dr. Cutler turn to practical methods for cultivating happiness in everyday life. The emphasis shifts toward training the mind, much as one trains the body through exercise. The Dalai Lama repeatedly insists that happiness is not simply a matter of luck or chance, but something that can be deliberately developed through consistent practice and effort. One of the central practices is meditation, which he presents not only as a spiritual discipline, but as a practical tool for mental well-being. Meditation, he explains, helps calm the mind, increase awareness, and create a space between stimulus and response. In this space, we can choose how to react rather than being controlled by automatic emotions. Even a few minutes a day of focusing on the breath, generating compassion, or reflecting on gratitude can, over time, reshape mental patterns. Dr. Cutler connects this with research showing the positive effects of meditation on stress reduction, emotional regulation, and even physical health. Another practical method is the deliberate cultivation of compassion. The Dalai Lama stresses that compassion is not just a moral virtue, but a direct path to happiness. By training ourselves to care about the suffering of others and wishing them well, we create feelings of warmth, connection, and purpose. Compassion reduces isolation and softens negative emotions like anger or envy. He suggests exercises such as imagining the suffering of others, reflecting on their shared humanity, and extending wishes for their happiness. Over time, this practice expands our capacity for empathy beyond close friends and family to include strangers and even those we consider enemies. Closely related is the practice of forgiveness. Holding on to resentment and grudges keeps us trapped in suffering, while forgiveness frees the mind. The Dalai Lama acknowledges that forgiving someone who has caused harm is difficult, but he emphasizes that forgiveness does not mean condoning wrongdoing. Instead, it means choosing not to be consumed by hatred, which ultimately harms us more than the offender. Forgiveness, in his view, is a gift we give ourselves because it restores peace of mind and allows use to move forward. The book also addresses the importance of setting realistic expectations. Many people set themselves up for disappointment by expecting life to be free of problems or relationships to be free of conflict. The Dalai Lama notes that difficulties are inevitable. What matters is how we respond to them. By expecting that challenges will arise, we are less shaken when they do. This mindset fosters resilience and allows us to face adversity with calmness rather than despair. He draws parallels to Tibetan Buddhist practices that emphasize accepting impermanence and uncertainty as natural aspects of life. In their dialogue, Dr. Cutler raises the issue of dealing with death, one of the greatest sources of fear and suffering for many people. The Dalai Lama approaches death with openness rather than avoidance. He suggests that reflecting on death is not morbid but liberating because it reminds us of the impermanence of life and the preciousness of the present moment. When we acknowledge that death is inevitable, we waste less time on trivial pursuits and focus more on what truly matters. The Dalai Lama himself regularly meditates on death as a way of preparing for it and reducing fear. For readers, he advises cultivating acceptance of mortality as a means of living more fully and with less anxiety. The conversation then turns to suffering on a larger scale, such as social injustice, war, and poverty. The Dalai Lama argues that while individuals cannot solve every global problem, each person can contribute. By embodying compassion in their own lives, small acts of kindness ripple outward, creating a more compassionate society. He stresses the interconnectedness of all beings, noting that in today's globalized world, the well-being of one community is increasingly linked to the well-being of others. This interdependence means that compassion is not just a personal virtue, but a social necessity. The Dalai Lama also emphasizes the importance of inner discipline. Just as athletes require training and discipline to excel, cultivating happiness requires commitment. This includes monitoring our thoughts, choosing constructive perspectives, and consistently practicing kindness and mindfulness. Without discipline, the mind easily falls into habits of negativity, but with training, we can redirect it toward positive states. Dr. Cutler highlights how this idea mirrors concepts in psychology about cognitive behavioral approaches, where changing thought patterns gradually shifts emotions and behaviors. Another layer of this discipline is balancing pleasure and responsibility. The Dalai Lama does not advocate rejecting pleasure, but warns against overindulgence. Enjoyment of food, relationships, or entertainment can enrich life, but when pursued excessively or at the expense of long-term well-being, pleasure becomes destructive. Moderation is the key. He points out that true happiness often requires short-term sacrifice for long-term benefit, such as studying for education, working to support one's family, or making ethical choices even when inconvenient. This perspective contrasts with the modern tendency to seek instant gratification. An interesting point of discussion in this section is the relationship between spirituality and happiness. The Dalai Lama clarifies that while he is a Buddhist monk, the principles he shares are not limited to Buddhism or any religion. Compassion, mindfulness, patience, and gratitude are universal qualities that anyone can cultivate, regardless of their beliefs. He emphasizes that spirituality in its broadest sense is about cultivating the human qualities that lead to happiness and reducing the causes of suffering. For some, this may be expressed through religion. For others, it may be a secular practice of ethics and self-reflection. The Dalai Lama and Dr. Cutler also touch on the importance of community. While happiness begins with the individual mind, it flourishes in connection with others. Loneliness is one of the most painful forms of suffering, and social isolation is increasingly common in modern societies. Building relationships based on trust, empathy, and kindness is essential for long-term well-being. He encouraged people to cultivate deep friendships rather than chasing superficial social approval, as genuine connections provide stability through life's ups and downs. Toward the end of this section, the Dalai Lama reinforces the idea that happiness is not found by eliminating all problems, but by transforming our relationship with them. Suffering can be a teacher, guiding us toward patience, compassion, and strength. By viewing challenges as opportunities for growth, we lessen their sting and find meaning even in hardship. This does not mean romanticizing suffering, but recognizing that it can contribute to the depth of our happiness when approached with the right mindset. By this stage in the book, the Dalai Lama and Dr. Cutler have woven together practical tools, philosophical insights, and psychological perspectives into a coherent approach. Happiness is presented as a lifelong journey rather than a destination. It requires effort, practice, and a willingness to look inward, but the reward is a stable and enduring sense of peace that external circumstances cannot easily shake. As the conversations between the Dalai Lama and Dr. Cutler draw toward conclusion, the focus shifts to integrating the principles of happiness into daily life. The book emphasizes that understanding the ideas intellectually is not enough. The real transformation comes from consistent practice and application. The Dalai Lama underscores that happiness is built moment by moment through the choices we make in how we think, speak, and act. One of the recurring themes in this final section is the role of ethics. The Dalai Lama explains that ethical behavior is not just a matter of religious commandment, but a practical foundation for happiness. When we act dishonestly, exploit others, or give in to greed, we create inner turmoil and erode trust in our relationships. Conversely, when we live with integrity, honesty, and kindness, we foster peace of mind and strengthen social bonds. Ethics, in his view, is inseparable from happiness because it aligns our actions with our deeper values and reduces inner conflict. The Dalai Lama also discusses the idea of responsibility. Each person, he says, has a responsibility not only to themselves but also to others. This responsibility comes from recognizing our interconnectedness. Our actions affect those around us, and their well-being affects us in turn. Living responsibly means making choices that reduce harm and increase benefit, not just in our immediate circles, but in society and the world at large. He argues that cultivating compassion and happiness is not a private pursuit. Alone it contributes to a more peaceful and humane world. Another key idea is resilience. Life will always bring challenges, losses, and disappointments, but the Dalai Lama emphasizes that resilience can be cultivated. Resilience comes from training the mind to remain calm in the face of adversity, maintaining perspective, and holding on to compassion even in difficult circumstances. When we accept that difficulties are part of life rather than anomalies, we can meet them with greater equanimity. He uses the metaphor of the ocean. While the surface may be turbulent, the deeper waters remain calm. Cultivating happiness is about accessing that deeper calm, even amid life's storms. The Dalai Lama and Dr. Cutler also explore the tension between individual happiness and collective well-being. In modern societies, people often view happiness as a personal pursuit, but the Dalai Lama insists that true happiness cannot exist in isolation. Because we are social beings, our happiness is deeply tied to the happiness of others. When communities are filled with mistrust, violence, or inequality, individuals inevitably suffer. Thus, building a compassionate society is essential to individual flourishing. He suggests that if more people embraced compassion and ethics, many of the world's conflicts and injustices could be alleviated. This vision of collective happiness extends to the global stage. The Dalai Lama reflects on war, poverty, and environmental crises, pointing out that these challenges are symptoms of greed, ignorance, and lack of compassion. While individuals cannot solve these issues alone, each person has the power to contribute through their daily choices, whether by reducing harm to the environment, practicing tolerance, or spreading kindness. He sees hope in humanity's capacity for empathy and cooperation, suggesting that even small acts of compassion create ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. The book also takes time to reflect on the role of science. The Dalai Lama expresses deep respect for scientific inquiry and sees it as complementary to spiritual wisdom. He is particularly interested in how neuroscience and psychology confirm the benefits of meditation, compassion, and positive thinking. For him, This convergence of science and spirituality shows that the principles of happiness are not abstract ideals but practical truths supported by evidence. Dr. Cutler emphasizes that the Dalai Lama's openness to science makes his teachings accessible to secular readers who may not share his religious background. Toward the end, the Dalai Lama returns to the simplicity of the message. Happiness is a choice and a skill. It is cultivated through compassion, perspective, gratitude, ethical living, and mental discipline. It requires effort, but it is within everyone's reach, regardless of external circumstances. Even in the midst of suffering, joy can be found through acceptance, kindness, and connection with others. Happiness is not about eliminating problems, but about creating an inner state that allows us to navigate them with peace. The Dalai Lama's teachings resonate with a sense of humility. He does not claim to have a perfect or effortless happiness himself, nor does he present himself as a figure above ordinary struggles. Instead, he shares practices and perspectives that he uses in his own life as a monk and as someone who has faced exile, political conflict, and the loss of his homeland. His example demonstrates that happiness is possible, even in the face of great suffering, which makes his message more relatable and inspiring. In closing, the book suggests that the art of happiness is not a destination, but a lifelong practice. It is an art because it requires creativity, patience, and dedication, rather than rigid formulas. Each person must experiment with these principles in their own lives, finding ways to apply compassion, mindfulness, and gratitude in their unique circumstances. In closing, the book suggests that the art of happiness is not a destination, but a lifelong practice. It is an art because it requires creativity, patience, and dedication, rather than rigid formulas. Each person must experiment with these principles in their own lives, finding ways to apply compassion, mindfulness, and gratitude in their unique circumstances, and mind that connect us to others and to our own deeper nature. By embracing compassion, perspective, ethical living, and inner discipline, we not only transform our own lives, but also contribute to a kinder, more peaceful world. Thank you for watching Mindful Reads. If you enjoyed this journey into timeless wisdom, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Every week, we bring you powerful insights from the world's most inspiring books to help you live with clarity, peace, and purpose. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and stay mindful.